Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Thursday's Theology. My name is Jeff, and I'm your host, and we are going to continue on in our series called Should They? And we're exploring different questions about, should Christians do this? Should Christians do that? And for today, we're going to actually focus on something that is kind of more or less a taboo thing, especially for college students who are Christian. And we'll get into that in a second. But today's topic we're going to cover is should Christians drink? Should Christians drink? Now, of course, going to start off by dying. By the way, we're towards the end of Uncharted 1, and it's going to get really difficult because I'm trying to, play and talk at the same time. So if I die a lot, just ignore it. It'll be fine. But anyway, before we get into the topic of should Christians drink, I just want to mention my own bias before we get started, and that is I do drink. I am a huge fan of bourbon and rye whiskey, but I also want to make sure that what you don't hear is like that I drink a lot, that I'm, drinking every day, that I'm drinking, tons and tons at the same time. That's not it at all. The reason I like bourbon and rye is because some of the best conversations that I've had with people, some of the most meaningful moments I've had with people have been over a glass of really, really good whiskey. So what I want you to hear is that I'm not drinking for the sake of drinking. I'm drinking because it is something that I enjoy doing with other people. It's something that I find conducive to having really good conversations, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you feel as though that taints my opinion, that's fine. You can have that opinion of me, but I just wanted to mention that ahead of time because the question of should Christians drink, I'm going to answer yes, they can drink. Should they and can they are two different questions. Now, should they, it highly depends on the situation. Now, this is something I've thought about a lot over the course of the past few years, especially working with college students. And what I tell them about alcohol in particular is that if it is necessary to have a good time, if it's necessary to numb yourself, if it's necessary to ingest a bunch of alcohol so that you can not feel something or not have to work through something or not have to process through something, then there's something fundamentally wrong. I think if alcohol is used as a numbing device, if it's used as a device to forget, if it's used as a means to just not have to deal with some of the pain and stuff in your own life, then you should probably be seeking counseling. There's deeper stuff going on than just wanting to drink alcohol. So should you drink alcohol? It depends very heavily upon the context of your life. Now, can they? That's a question of biblical theology. And to that, I say a resounding yes. And the reason being is that you have multiple times throughout Scripture where heaven is described as a wedding banquet. Now, this might seem like a weird example to say like, oh, well, heaven's like a wedding feast. But I think at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, Jesus gives us a very, very key insight into how that wedding feast is going to look. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, the very first miracle that Jesus does is he's invited to a wedding in the city of Cana, and he's just an invited guest. He's hanging out there, and they run out of wine. Now, for a Jewish wedding to run out of wine is a huge embarrassment to the wedding host and to the groom and to the bride. So the fact that they have run out of wine is a potentially embarrassing moment for them. So Jesus' mom comes to him and says, "Hey, they ran out of wine." And Jesus tells her, "What are you doing? It's not my time yet. Like why are you asking me to do this?" But then she goes to the servants and says to them, "Whatever that guy tells you, whatever my son tells you to do, just do it." And they're like, "Okay." So then Jesus asks for these ceremonial cleansing buckets to be filled with water to him, and he turns it into wine. And what is a key clue to this whole thing that's going to unlock a lot in our conversation is the fact that the host comes to but basically they say, "This is the best wine, you saved the best for last." And the fact that they say you've saved the best for last is an important clue because of the context of the cultural forces surrounding it. Now, what I mean by that is basically what would happen at a wedding feast is that you would put out the really, really good wine first so that people would be like, "Oh, this party's lavish, it's really great." They put out They spared no expense. This is good wine. So then, by the time you get people drinking, you bring out the cheaper stuff so that they're too drunk to understand or taste the difference between the good stuff and the bad stuff. So the fact that the wine that Jesus turns water into is described as saving the best for last means that they had not tasted anything like it before. It was good wine. It was the best, and they had saved it for the last. Now, the reason why this is an important story that I want to share with you is because I don't think Christians agree on whether or not that wine was now non-alcoholic. For those I have a lot of relatives who, to this very day, swear up and down that that wine was non-alcoholic wine. And the reason being is because they say that, Jesus wouldn't condone drunkenness and stuff like that, which I agree with. I don't think Jesus would condone drunkenness and doesn't condone drunkenness. But if we say that, oh, that wine was non-alcoholic, then we miss the point of the story. And the point of the story is to show how much of a lavish wedding feast this is. So when we zoom out from Scripture to a wider lens, we see, again, all these descriptions of heaven being described as a wedding feast, a lavish wedding banquet. And that means there's good wine there. There's celebration there. There's something to be taken in community and enjoyed and celebrated. So should Christians drink? Yes, I mean, it's biblical. It's biblical to have good wine and celebratory drinks with one another. We see that at the wedding feast at Cana. We see that as the description of heaven. We see it all over the place, especially in the Psalms and the Proverbs, of how good wine impacts good conversation. Now, what I do have to say is that it's only in moderation. And what I mean by that is that ingesting alcohol and having alcohol should never be done with the sole purpose of getting drunk. And the reason being is because that perverts its use. It perverts what it's intended to do, and that is to, at least in my opinion, draw people into closer relationship with one another, to give them the means of having a good conversation and a good bonding time with somebody. But if it's done just to become drunk, just to become to numb stuff, to escape stuff, then you're perverting what it's used for. Ignore the fact that I'm switching it to easy. Just ignore that fact. But it's only in moderation, and the reason why it's only in moderation is because if we as Christians drink a lot, and become drunk, then it opens up the possibility to making a whole host of terrible, terrible life choices. Scripture warns about getting drunk because it destroys your inhibitions. It gets rid of your ability to be able to make good choices and to make righteous choices. Because when you are drunk, you make a whole lot of bad decisions. I mean, you don't have to really go very far to see how drunkenness can affect somebody. Now, what I tell college students that come to me and ask, like, oh, is it okay to go to a party and drink? I tell them, yes, but you always have to be careful about what your intentions are for drinking. Again, if it's to get drunk, if it's to forget, then I say, no, you shouldn't drink. But if you're going and you're having a good time and it's done by legal drinking age, I want to make that very clear. If you are 21 or older and are legally able to have a drink, I do not think it's a bad thing for you to have a drink with your friends. But again, if the purpose is to get drunk, then there's something wrong with the intention you have bringing into it. So I just want to make that absolutely crystal clear. Now, what we've been exploring is, should Christians do this? Should Christians do that? And I think one of the main reasons why people say Christians shouldn't drink is because they are afraid to even broach the topic of a Christian having a drink of alcohol. Because again, if you have that first taste, then all of a sudden you're going to slide into sin. All of a sudden you're going to slide into a terrible, terrible lifestyle. And for some, that might be true. It might be true that one drink might lead to 2 or 3 or 4, and that can be terrible. So again, if that's you, or if that's your case, please seek counseling, because there's an underlying problem that you have to deal with that alcohol cannot solve. Now, with I think why Christians take such a hard line with alcohol is for that very reason. They don't want to give any excuse for drunkenness to happen. They don't want to give any chance for alcohol to become a problem for people. And I agree with that. I think that that's a good thing to have. But I think on the other side of it, we have gone so far against alcohol that we've almost demonized it. We've said, hey, it's evil, you shouldn't do it. And I don't think that's right either. So I think we have to have a balanced approach when it comes to alcohol, because if we have a misunderstanding of alcohol, if we misunderstand the theology of the New Testament, then we're missing out on a key piece of what the kingdom of heaven is going to be like. I'm not saying the kingdom of heaven is going to be this drunken party all the time, but what I am saying is that heaven is described as a place that is a feast with wine. So depending on what you view, what your views are on alcohol will depend on how you perceive heaven. If you think alcohol is terrible, that it's leading you down the path of destruction, then you are going to say anybody who drinks, including Christians, are participating in evil. And that's just the natural outcome of that type of theological thinking. But I don't think you can read the New Testament or any of the descriptions of heaven in the Old Testament and come to a conclusion that alcohol is not going to be a part of heaven, that alcohol is not going to be a part of celebrating Christ's kingdom inaugurated here on earth. I just don't think you can have that justification based on reading the Bible. Again, I want to make sure that what you hear is that you have to be absolutely careful when it comes to drinking alcohol, because it can lead to a whole bunch of other issues. So, yeah, just be careful. But as for the question of should Christians drink, there is no biblical prohibition on Christians drinking. There is prohibitions on becoming drunk, and we've talked a little bit about that, of making poor life choices and stuff like that. But the point being is that there is no mandate that you can come up with based on reading the scripture that says alcohol is outlawed, alcohol is bad, this is bad, that's bad. There's nothing in the scripture that prohibits that. It's up to the individual to decide for themselves in moderation how much they are going to drink and for what purposes. So again, this can be a kind of a controversial topic, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. So if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, let me know. I would love to chat with you about it. I can tell you that next week's episode is going to be the last episode of Season 1 of Thursday's Theology, and then we're going to go on a little bit of a break to regroup and cast vision for the next season. But next week we have a special guest star, and I'm not even going to tell you because I want it to be a surprise. So next week will be our last episode of Season 1, and yeah, I've really enjoyed this series. I've really enjoyed talking about these kind of sensitive issues with all of you. So thank you for allowing me that, and yeah, thanks for joining us. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and subscribe, like this video, comment on it, whatever you feel is whatever is your heart's desire. But as always, my name is Jeff. I'm your host. This is Thursday's Theology, and remember, theology doesn't always have to be difficult. It is simply the study of who God is. Take care. We'll see you next week.